I learned how to make myself small before language had a name for it. It was not an act of shrinking, but an arrangement of habits, paths I did not take, cliffs I skirted, the timing of my walks. I kept my head down when I passed the river where fishermen came at dawn, and I always let the morning be their hour. I moved through the woods like a part of it carefully, predictably, almost mechanically, because predictability is reliable when everything else feels like a trap. People think of the woods as wild. They forget the steady human wildness that pushes into trees, chainsaws in my sleep, trucks along the gravel road, the light bulbs that stay on all night in houses like new stars where none should be. Those lights and machines taught me fear. They taught me how to count the days until the next stamp of footsteps on a trail, the next laugh that carries too close. Once, a boy ran into my clearing with his soccer ball and a set of vivid white sneakers and shouted at me in the kind voice of someone who had always had a family to shout to. He stood there, panting, hands on knees, and said, "Hello?" I could have said hello back. I did not. I watched them from green places, inside a thicket, above on a ridge where a rock gives me a wide view. I watched their small dramas. Two women arguing over a map, a man lighting a cigarette and staring at the burn until it is ash. So much of their life is light and flame and clear intervals. They use metal knives to open things, and they leave things behind. An apple with a bite, a thermos brimmed with coffee. Hunger is a practical thing. I learn the rhythms of their forgetfulness. I learn, too, to expect their suddenness. A car will appear like a silver animal on the road and scrape the night away. A dog will smell my trail and bark until the air remembers nothing else. I keep my distance because I have seen what it means when human surprise becomes human fear. And where fear grows, something else grows too. Voices with cameras, men with nets, drones that sound like buzzing bees. I am careful about scent. When the wind turns a certain way, I cannot cross that ridge because they who walk with boots will smell me for miles. A camper once set a blanket down under the same spruce I sleep in and left a book open face down. In the book was a photograph of me, drawn, of course, with exaggeration. The lines made me look monstrous on paper. When I caught my reflection in the river at twilight, I saw something different, a shape that had learned, not a thing to be hunted. I closed my hands around the page with a deliberateness that made my pulse slow and turned the book face up, as if covering an eye. Money and plans and concrete never quite reach into the deep places, but little by little they scrape. There was a stretch of the valley where I could count on there being no cars for 3 days straight, where an old logging road was finally choked with ferns and you could hear owls more often than voices. Then a bulldozer cut a path for a pipeline. The hum of it was like a sickness that spread through the ground. Trees toppled in a confetti of green. Men in bright vests would show up midweek and take measurements, talking into boxes. They pointed cameras at clearings. They were efficient, and they assumed permanence. Their confidence was the kind that terrifies me the most because it does not hesitate. There are small mercies. Sometimes an old woman leaves a loaf on her porch, with a note she won't find again, and I bring it to the hollow where fungi curl like small moons. Sometimes a teenage girl comes to the river and removes her shoes and sits with her feet in cold water, her hair a dark curtain over her shoulders. She hums. She did not set out to find me. She sat where I could see her from the shadows, and I learned the pattern of her breath. I learned when her eyes scanned the trees how often she looked back at the path to make sure the world was still predictable. That is what we both sought, predictability. And we both found that it is a fragile thing. Fear is not only from them. Sometimes I startle myself awake and imagine all the ways I could be seen. I imagine a camera with a long lens catching the slow angle of my jaw. I imagine a child's shout that breaks into 100 voices and 100 boots. Those imaginings are practical. They are the architecture of how I plan to remain unseen. It began to be too much when rules changed, and machines came with the speed of promises. Trail signs that used to be hand-carved were replaced with metal ones and QR codes. The campground had surveillance poles. An app advertised wildlife photography tours for weekend warriors who wanted a story and would pay for it. They started leaving trail cameras by the creek, tiny black boxes with blinking red lights that made no attempt to hide. I found one once, neatly propped in a forked sapling like an offering. It looked at me with a hungry eye for a shape. I smashed it with a rock and listened to the click like a small victory, and knew it would only be a small one. Leaving is not something I decided in a single breath. It is a calculation made from the sum of many nights, days of listening to chain-link fences grow, days of watching money draw straight lines through the only places I had left. I packed what I needed in 2 nests on opposite sides of a ridge, some dried berries, a strip of cured hide from an animal I had found dead, and the worn blanket an old camper had left behind. I walked with the intention that anything unfamiliar would be translated as danger, and that if cornered I would choose distance over clash. The day I left, the air held the clean sadness of late summer. I stepped out from the cover of my trees long enough to let the sun find the curve of my shoulders. From a distance, a man with a dog shouted a name I didn't know. Maybe his dog's, maybe his child's. I watched the string of houses like teeth, and then I turned away. I knew where I was going because I had been counting maps in my head for years, following a line of ridges that still remembered the old sky. When I walked, my feet left wide prints in the soft earth. I have always been big enough that the forest notices me. I am careful about my size for other reasons as well. They have called me many things in their stories, but naming doesn't change what you are. You can put a name on something and still be afraid of it. All that talk never touched the slow, sensible planning, the small kindnesses, the fear. I am someone who learned how to vanish into ferns and how to keep his heart from making a sound at the wrong moment. I am someone who has watched houses multiply and decided it was time to find a quieter place. If you must finish this with a tag, make it clear and simple. I am Bigfoot.